Okay, so we're live. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Data Skills Story Show, where we help you learn data skills and upskill yourself in your career. And this show happens bi weekly. We have an amazing guest every week for you. And this week, it's a different time because our guest is from Australia. Uh, and, um, and yeah, I'm excited to talk all about SQL today. And I am Lekna, and I'm a senior data governance analyst. And in this show, we'll be talking all about the importance of SQL. And here with me is Raj. Raj, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hey everyone, thank you for joining us. This live. This is Rajshekar Prabhakar. Currently work as a director of data science. In the past, I've been in robotics, automation, um, AI space, and that's kind of my background. So let's dive in and have this amazing conversation with Shashan. Excited for it.
So let's welcome Shashane. Hi, Shashane.
Hi guys, thanks for having me.
It's
Welcome.
really awesome to have you, Shashane. I know we've spoken before. You have an amazing page on Instagram where you
Thank you.
focus mostly on SQL. And when I thought about SQL, I was like, okay, it's going to be Shashane. So
Yeah, thanks. Thank you. Yeah, I honestly the only thing I talk about is SQL actually on my page.
mhm.
But yeah, my name is Shashin, like I said, and I've been working as a data engineer for over 3 years now, almost 4 years. I've been in the data space for over 3 years, working different data jobs. Right now, I'm a data engineer for a small startup, a fintech startup here in Australia, Melbourne, and uh, yeah, that's currently where I'm at.
Mhm. So how has your experience been as a data engineer? Do you want to share something?
Yeah. So far, it's been a great career. I really enjoyed actually. So initially in university, I was doing Bachelor of Science. I was hoping to go into biochemistry,
Hmm.
and then my friend showed me some coding. I never actually saw Python code. I saw Python code for the first time that day, and then I really enjoyed like how you can actually make computer do things by just giving commands. So that's when I spoke into IT. And since then, I've not really looked back, and I really enjoyed my career so far. I think the best part of my career is actually doing the teaching part. So I do a lot of content creation on my SQL handbook page, and also I do live event speaking for small meeting user groups here in Melbourne, and a few in other other parts of Australia. That has been very rewarding. Like when you are able to like explain a concept to somebody and then they say, thank you for actually that made sense to me and made click. That has been the best part of my career so far.
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, I think SQL has always been like the most in demand skill. Like I
yeah.
literally in the chat we already have one question. So
Okay.
those of you watching, if you have any questions, put it in the chat box, and we will get back to you like in the last 10 minutes of the session. With that, so Shashan, do you want to share the importance of SQL, especially
Yeah.
for data professional?
Yeah. I think I look. I might be biased, obviously, but I think SQL is a very important tool to know for anyone who's looking to get into data. And that's not my opinion, really. That's like what the market says. So, for example, in Australian market, which is what I can speak on, if you look at any job page or any job advertisement, there for any kind of job that says data in the title, data analyst, data engineer, database administrator, database developer, data scientist, what have you, they'll ask, hey, do you know SQL to an extent, whether it's high level or even entry level. SQL will be a part of that job description. Uh, People have always said like uh, SQL is the bread and butter of any data job. Also, there's other tools obviously very important like Excel and maybe Python, depending on where you want to go in your data career. But yeah, I think SQL is like foundations for anyone looking to get into
Hmm.
any career in data, and especially for people in entry level. I would say like if you could learn one skill, I would suggest SQL, and then after that, just work on your communication skills and your soft skills. I think
Mhm.
people get too honed down into technical skills that they don't, you know, look at what else is actually asked by an employer, like how well you work in a team and stuff like that. But yeah, a skill I think is very important.
Hmm.
So, Shishan, there are some folks who would be joining this live. Are those folks who have never been in data field and they're looking to transition into data also?
Hmm.
For their benefit, would you mind explaining what SQL is in simple words? Explain like in
Yeah,
five or something like that.
yeah. So SQL, it stands for structured query language. Basically, look, it's a language that you use to talk to a database. So a database has obviously tables, and in those tables there is data in it. Um, to communicate with that data, to extract data, and to actually visualize and maybe carry out analytics on that data, you can use SQL. Um, that's like the tool that you can use to actually talk to majority of database management systems. Uh, the one I specialize in is called SQL Server. That's by Microsoft. It's a relational database management system. You guys will hear many terms, and I feel like beginners will always get like they'll get overwhelmed by all these terms because they all have SQL in it, like Postgres SQL, MySQL, SQL Server, TSQL, PLSQL. Like there's all these terms that will confuse a lot of beginners. And I would just say like understand what like these are don't get overwhelmed. They're just flavors. They're just different ways to wrap around what SQL is, which is just basically a language to talk to a database management system. And some of the terms I've said are actually they are just database management systems. They're not actually a language. So
Mhm.
yeah, don't get overwhelmed by terms like that.
Hmm. So, to follow up, I have a question. So, if
Yeah.
someone wants to get started learning the SQL, uh, like you mentioned, there are different flavors of SQL. So, which one should they start? Like, which one should?
Oh, that's a good question. Look, I think okay. There's something called ANSI SQL, which is the American standard for what SQL is.
Hmm.
That's what you should really like just know, especially if it's a beginner. And what that's a fancy way to say like the standard way of SQL throughout all. That's what all these tools I just mentioned earlier: SQL Server, PostgreSQL, MySQL, Oracle, whatever you have. All these database management systems, all these databases, they all use ANSI SQL as a standard across, and then each one will have their own special syntaxes that's unique to that platform.
Hmm.
So what I say is the best one to use. Look, I'm an Azure data engineer. That's specifically who I am. So I guess I'm biased towards Microsoft, and my whole career is built on SQL Server. Like my first job I got because I was able to show that I had a strong understanding in SQL Server, which is a database management system, and that uses TSQL specifically. Um, that's my whole page talks about that specific flavor, but I know a lot of companies that like open source options like Postgres, especially startups. They don't want to pay any money, which is completely fair reason. So you can't go wrong with what you pick, in my opinion. It's more of just getting started and learning, SQL as because you learn a lot of similar concepts because they all follow the ANSI SQL standard. So don't get too overwhelmed by that. I wouldn't suggest jumping from one to one. I wouldn't suggest you start with Postgres and then
Yeah.
2 weeks later you're like, oh, I'm going to jump to MySQL. Don't do that. Just stick to one and just get familiar. Build a home lab. Like download SQL Server has a free edition, developer edition online. You can download that and play around on your own computer. You can use Postgres on your own computer. Just stick to one and get familiar with that. And if you're going for a job that says, oh, we want someone who is MySQL and you are Postgres, for example, tell them that, hey, look, I'm new to this, but I have experience in Postgres. I have a home environment. I've played around my own system. Uh, I can answer any questions you have about SQL, and I'm more than eager to get involved in MySQL as well. Just be honest. People understand like, you can transfer those skills around. So don't feel like one's better than the other.
Hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely, yeah. I think there are like people where like I have done that. Like when you read some article about Postgres SQL, you're learning T SQL, and then you like okay maybe Postgres is better. Let me start learning that. I think that's a pretty common thing that I've seen, like especially for those who want to learn SQL.
100%. 100%. In the market, I would say the biggest companies use for the relational structured data, they use SQL Server and Oracle. They're the biggest players in terms of large companies.
Mhm.
Um, but like, you know, uh, like I said, if you know Postgres really well and if you know how to use, I think Postgres is one is called PLSQL. I think that's the one for Postgres.
Mhm.
You could, if you know PLSQL really well, you can transfer that to TSQL in SQL Server. So don't get too hung up on that.
Mhm.
But yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. So, do you want to like rate what is like who uses like SQL most? Like for data analyst, data engineer, data scientist. Um, like as a data engineer, how much of SQL do you use like on a probably daily basis?
Hmm. Yeah, good question. That's so. Like I said, my experience so far has been I've just been a data engineer, not worked other jobs. But if I had to guess, um, like in my experience as a data engineer, I use SQL every single day, every single day. And it's like I'm constantly writing like pipelines. That some pipelines I write are just pure SQL. There's nothing fancy about it. It's just standard SQL, stored procedures, functions, views, nothing over the top. Um, but I would say my job personally, currently, I do, let's say 80% of my work is SQL.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, let's say 70% SQL, 20% Python, and then other remaining 10% is like uh, just database management. That's what I would say my job is strictly right now. And also there's Power BI dashboards and all these things. But SQL is a big chunk of my current job and has been from my other job as well. I've worked two other companies before this.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
But yeah, yeah,
Yeah, I think we have like all the three roles in this live session. So Raj is again in data science. I'm data analytics, and we have a data engineer. So
very good, perfect. So you guys also know then like SQL is quite important, I guess, in your career as well, I assume, to an
mhm.
extent.
Yeah,
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 yeah.
for data scientists, it's a little different. Depends on the companies. If you have data
right,
engineers, they focus more on the database queries and getting the data, ETL
true.
processes and other stuff like that. For data scientists, I think the ratios change. Like you were saying, 80% for you is like SQL or Python. The 80% for data scientists would be in Python. You'd spend a lot of time
Oh yeah,
experimenting, writing
true.
code, training, and testing, all that stuff in Python. About 5 to 10% of databases. It depends on the company to company, I guess. Yeah, into fintech as well. So there's a lot of restrictions to accessing the data. Performance systems. You don't want someone who's not very familiar with it to write code. So we let the experts, being data engineers, data analysts, to go and get the data for data scientists. But I think in a startup or another company where the data doesn't have to be that secure or there are not too many users, data scientists will definitely start querying and getting data and looking at it. So I guess it depends on company to company. It is not the skill that differentiates data scientists versus others, um, but it is required for you to get the data for your own. So nonetheless,
Very
it's
true.
important.
That's actually a very
How's it
good
in?
point about the company size as well. Like a small company like the one I work for, either you wear many different hats and you do different things in the data space. Whereas a larger business, I think you'll be more honed and more focused on the specific thing that you were hired to do. That which is a good
Mhm,
point.
Hmm. Yeah,
right.
absolutely. And yeah, I think for coming from a data analyst perspective, I would say we would probably use mostly, I would say 70% SQL, and then 30% is like data visualization, like
Yeah,
Power BI or Tableau or something like that. But I mean, not 30%, but probably I would say 25%, whereas the 5% would be like Python. That is really less for a data analyst.
Mm.
Yeah.
true.
Mhm. Yeah, awesome. So yeah, do you know, like, with your experience interacted to, people who are trying to move into data, do you have any like misconceptions people have usually while learning SQL, or if they're just getting started in this data profession?
Hmm.
Like
That's
something like, like, okay, I don't need to learn SQL, because I've seen many people jump directly into Python and just forget about SQL. They're like, Python, 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 and then they end up not learning SQL. So do you see any of those?
yeah. I think you're right that it is. I think Python's a hotter language, especially with how like uh, the how data science is also portrayed a little bit. Um, but misconceptions with learning SQL, I would say people tend to, if they learn topics like, if they can query a database, like they know select from where, group by, having, order by, couple of joins, then they know, I don't know, like subqueries and those few concepts. They think they have mastered SQL, and nothing wrong with that. That's actually more than enough for the first job. I believe you can actually impress entry level positions with that kind of knowledge. But I would say that uh, there's a lot more to SQL than that. And I feel people tend to, I believe that's quite surface level. There's a lot more in SQL and a lot more deep you can go, especially with, let's talk about performance tuning. Like it's one thing to write a query to get data, but then you have to write a query that's also the least resource intensive on your system. You
Mhm.
don't want a query running up there and destroying your production server and just getting back a couple of rows. Like you want it to be actually performant and quick. So there's a difference by writing a query that works and a query that works well, I would say. So I think people tend to underestimate how uh, you know the level of depth they should go in SQL, and that again that depends on your career and like where you are at your career and stuff like that. But for my job, especially I would say when I write SQL code that goes to production servers, my main concern is how well would this perform? Would this cause high memory issues? Would this cause high CPU issues? Um, if this query is run 1,000 times a day, can my system handle that?
Mhm.
If it runs one time a day, all right, then maybe it can be a bit heavy because it's just once or once a week. All right, fair enough. But if it's very frequent, then yeah. So all these, I think performance is like a topic that people don't put much love to, and they think they learn the basics of SQL, which is like what I mentioned earlier, and that's it. I'm good. Don't need to know about temporary tables. Don't need to know why uh, the difference from a temporary table and like things like table variables and store procedures and functions and views and all these things. They feel like they know there's no fundamentals. They're happy with it, and that's all you need to know. I feel like you could negotiate higher salaries and go for high senior positions if you really work on your SQL skills a little bit and sharpen them up. That's
Mhm.
my personal opinion. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think that brings me to another question where, like, so you talked about fundamentals, like the depth of knowledge that they need to have in SQL, right? What do you think about AI, and
Mm.
with all the automation that's happening? What do you think is the future of SQL?
I think AI is going to like make a data engineer's job much quicker. Like it's if you can really leverage AI to a point where you can ask it, hey, look, this is some table schemas. I need to grab this kind of data. Can you write me a SQL pipeline to do this? The AI will actually do a pretty good job. Sorry, my thing's about to fall off. It does a pretty good job on actually grabbing the data. Good job of running up a pipeline.
Mhm.
But what I would say is that a good skill to have with if you know SQL quite well is by going through that code that was spit out to you and just make sure that this code is as performant as it should be because there's so many factors that go into how well a query can run and uh, every person like there's no one answer. I can't tell you CTs are better than this or functions are better than this. It doesn't work like that. It works on your use case and your data. How selective is your data in your tables? What's the index situation like? What are other queries that are running during that time period? Is it a very high peak hour traffic period of time when you're running this query? Is it an analytic query or is it a transactional query? These things all matter. So I think AI is a great tool, and I think it is going to enhance data professionals
Mhm.
in being faster. You can produce work much quicker. Um, as long as you ask the right question and you feed enough data to actually get a good response,
Mhm.
which
Mm-hmm.
can be a skill in itself, to be honest.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, you just got to, but you have to know SQL to understand what you're looking at. You can't just tell, write me this and then trust it blatantly. You have no idea how that's going to go down in your production server. And I don't think any company is going to take the risk of being like, okay, the computer told me that this is correct, copy and paste, run in production. I don't think any company's going to work that right now. It's going to be too
Mm-hmm.
risky. So as an engineer, you should know what you're reading and what you're putting in your production service. But AI is a great tool. I really do think it's going to speed up people's workloads.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any inputs, Raj, on that?
Um, yeah, it's definitely going to change and definitely have a differentiation between someone who uses AI like ChatGPT to come up with SQL queries versus someone who doesn't use it. Yes, probably someone with 2 years experience using ChatGPT can portray it to look like or have the similar performance of a 10-year experienced SQL professional. Maybe again, like Shin said, it could be complete BS that ChatGPT is giving out. You wouldn't know, and if you just copy paste and run, you'll be in trouble. But optimizing queries and then, okay, ChatGPT gave me this, these 10 lines. Does it make sense? Having some understanding before you run would be a big game changer. And it could give you really performant queries and really ways that you haven't thought about or thought through can
Very
come up.
true.
And it's definitely
It's
going to
very
set
advanced.
apart whoever uses versus who doesn't use AI in their work. So that's good. And
Fully agree.
there is talk about like big chunk of data analyst job is to get translate the data from you know business requirement or business ask saying, hey, how many new users did we have this month? Translate that into a database query, right? Get the response, show it to them in a dashboard, or just give it to them in Excel. Now I think that step can be automated using something like ChatGPT technology, right? So
So
business can
true.
directly ask that question to a AI system that's aware of your database schema, databases, tables, and it can tell you exactly what you're looking for. So business can directly start interacting with the databases with the help of AI, and that's only in the edge, and it's probably going to be here by end of this year or next year. Big companies are working towards it.
I actually fully agree. I think, like you said, it's going to change. Like, there's going to be a lot of people who are not technically strong, and they're going to be able to now interact with the data by just asking questions, which is very powerful. And I
Mhm.
think
Hmm.
that would that would open up a lot of like. I think the data engineering field will change. I think every data job is going to change. It's going to be very interesting. ChatGPT is very impressive. Like just AI in general is very impressive. I've tried it. I've tried asking questions. I've asked to optimize code. It does a very good job at that. It's very impressive.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. I think I was taking a this evening. I was taking a course on prompt engineering, and it is so amazing to see how, like, how you can make ChatGPT to give you the right answers, especially the tuning of those queries that you give and the answers that it gives. I was really amazed and surprised that just by tuning the queries that you give into ChatGPT, the results that it produces are so different.
Yeah, yeah, 100%. That's actually another good point. If an engineer makes a query and they think it could be better, they could just feed it to ChatGPT and ask, "Can you make it better?" And
Yeah,
like that's another way Chat AI can help change the workload for engineers.
yeah, absolutely, yeah. Yeah, so that brings me to almost the end of the session. So before we get to the Q&A, I have another question for you, Shashain. So what are the two skills that got you your current job?
Hmm. Uh, okay, I would say two technical skills that got me my current job. Definitely, obviously, one of them is SQL, obviously, and the other one would be I for some reason early on in my during my bachelor degree, I studied SQL Server quite a bit, like the database management system, and I studied like database concepts a lot. So I
Mhm.
think database knowledge really helped out. So like things like normalization, denormalization, know how to do proper database design, how to make an ER diagram. Those that kind of concepts I was quite strong on as well. Which SQL and that knowledge goes hand in hand. So I would say my database management knowledge and SQL were my technical skills that got me uh, my first job.
Mhm.
Because my first job was actually a database administrator. So
Okay.
it perfect. Yeah, yeah. For Microsoft SQL Server databases.
Mhm.
So it was very quite lucky, really. Yeah.
Do you
So
have
yeah.
any non-technical skills to the list?
Yeah, yeah. To be honest, I think non-technical skills for non-grad for graduates is very important, like communication. I the way I showed where I showed communication skills on my resume was that during my time in my university, I did a public talk for a small user group.
Mm-hmm.
It was on database indexes. Yeah, it was on indexes like class indexes, non-class indexes.
Mm-hmm.
And for that week, I felt like all I knew was indexes, and so it was very very daunting doing that talk. But did it, and then I put the talk on LinkedIn. I put pictures. I advertised it a lot, and then I was at a conference 2 weeks later uh, in Melbourne, and I met a guy. I told him we were having a chat, and he told me what I do. And I told I did a talk about this. I do database stuff, and then he's like, "Oh, we're actually looking for a guy who knows database stuff." And this guy apparently was a the guy I was talking to was owner of a company, which I had no idea. So I was like very lucky. So yeah, I would say communication and showing communication, like maybe doing a talk online or maybe just making small videos online if you're a bit shy in that way, or even um, just doing more networking and meetup groups. But yeah, communication is definitely a skill I would say is very needed, and also like like teamwork and all those things.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, if you can, explain a technical topic in layman's terms uh, to someone who's non-technical, that a company would value that,
Mm-hmm.
and they would think that this guy is. It's good. It's a good skill to have as a
Mm-hmm.
graduate of the university, or just someone who has no experience as of yet.
Mm-hmm.
Mm.
Awesome. Yeah, that's absolutely right. And I think, especially speaking, putting out your work, that is so important to
Yeah,
even people for to start noticing what you're doing. Yeah.
you got to put out your work. That's actually a great. Yeah, it's a great way to say it. You got to put out your work. You got to make an online presence. Um, Whether it's your GitHub portfolio or something, people have to know that okay, this guy actually knows what he's talking about. You can't just tell people that oh, I know SQL, and then you hope for them to believe you. They won't give you an interview because
Mm-hmm.
there'll be people who have portfolios. There'll be people who have extensive uh, other ways to communicate, talks, and networking. So yeah, you got to put yourself out there. I
Yep.
would say. Mm.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. So, do you want to share one unique skill that you have apart from being a data professional, data engineer?
Oh yeah, look, I in my spare time I like to golf. And a new skill I've been learning for the last like 6 months is trying to learn how to box. So boxing is a bit of a fun one. It's very scary, but it's fun. Yeah, it's something new I've been trying.
Mhm. That's
Yeah,
awesome.
Mhm.
Yeah.
yeah.
So now let's take a couple of questions from the audience here. So yes, I think it's from Vasant. He's asking, can you explain complete resources from a beginner? Okay, so do you have any resources for a beginner to advance for SQL?
hmm That's a good question. Look, there's great websites, plenty of free websites right now. SQL Bolt is a good example of one. It goes through very entry level concepts. It talks about column names in select lists. So that's as basic you can get, and really builds on nicely. W3 School is also a great one. There's many options. A book that I would recommend, that I feel anyone in their journey, whether they're a beginner who knows nothing or an expert, there's a book called TSQL Fundamentals. Now, obviously, it's on TSQL specifically, but that book has changed my life. I continue to look at that for notes. It's there's always something new I can learn from the book. It's really good. So it's called TSQL Fundamentals by Itzen Benga, something like that.
Uh,
But
by whom is
yeah,
it?
sorry,
Who is the author?
it's Zek. I can't pronounce it. It's like it's I think European. It's Zek Benga, something
Okay.
like that. Yeah, I can give you a link to the book later, so you can advertise it. I have no affiliation with that. It's just I really think the book's really great.
Hmm.
And another great way is to check out blogs online. There's a lot of blogs by people like Brent Oza. He's a uh, SQL Server professional, and he's an expert in performance tuning. He creates great content, free articles online. Pinal Dave, he's a gentleman in India who also talks about SQL quite a lot. These guys, and Paul Randall, he made the transaction log for the SQL Server database engine. So in Microsoft, so he's great as well. So you can find a lot of free blogs online that gives a lot of great resources. I would suggest SQLBulk.com as a pretty good spot to start if you are new to learning SQL.
Okay. Awesome. Yeah, I think for those watching, we will provide you the resources in the comments after
Yeah,
this session.
awesome.
Yeah. And one more question here from Mrinalini. She's asking, after completing basic SQL courses, how do we start with guided projects for beginners?
Oh, yeah. That's a great question. So I would suggest this, Kaggle.com is a great place to find free data sets. And really just pick whatever data you're interested in. It could be F1 Formula cars, it could be tennis, it could be whatever you're interested in. Find data sets that you're interested in, and then just ask yourself some questions. Like you might get a data set on the 8th season of Game of Thrones. How many? And if you have data that has, I don't know, all the deaths that were in all the seasons, you can maybe ask yourself which season has the most deaths. You know, funny little questions you can write up. You can show some personality as well with it, and then write down the questions in a uh, README file on your GitHub portfolio, and just say like, look, these are questions I asked myself on this data, and here's a SQL code that I've written to answer these questions. Then that's a great way to actually go about. You can make your own projects that way,
Mhm.
and you can make really anything you like.
Yeah.
So yeah, I would suggest Kaggle.com is a great place to begin doing that.
Mhm. Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, and I think you get like so many data sets on Kaggle. You can just, or even actually ChatGPT creates data sets. So, uh,
You can exactly, yeah.
so we do that too. So do we have a time for another question?
I don't mind.
Okay.
Yeah.
So there's one more question here. Karthik is asking, tell us more about ANSI SQL, and may I know which topic to focus on in more in SQL?
Hmm. So that's a tough question for me to answer because it depends on like where you are in your journey. Uh, I would say if you're a beginner, just maybe there's something called set theory. Set theory is a great thing
Mhm.
to understand how the database engine works and looks at queries. It's a topic that's passed up a lot when people look at SQL, but it's a great topic to actually just to understand properly. You can find videos in set theory on YouTube and stuff. But for me to say a specific topic for you to focus on is a bit difficult because there's so many, and they're all equally important. They all go hand in hand. But
Mhm.
I would just say, look, if you are someone who's a beginner, focus on things like the very basics, like select, from, where, group by, having, order by, joins are very important. CTEs, subqueries are also quite important. If you get those topics I just mentioned and get a good grip on them, learn how to write them stuff, you can pass entry level interviews. I'm talking about entry level. You can pass those interviews. And if you want to go further, you're going to need to know like store procedures, functions, what's the difference in store procedure and function, when should you use a store procedure, when should you use a function, what different types of functions are there, table value, inline value, views. Uh, there's a lot you can actually go deeper when you look at SQL. But it depends on your learning journey. And I think I can't really tell you one specific thing to work on. It
Mhm.
depends where you are in your journey. So it's a natural progression.
Yep.
But the earlier things I mentioned and the starting point is a good foundation, I would say,
Mhm.
to like kick off things.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you so much, Shasheen. I think there was so much resources that you shared. Definitely, I will need a list of it so that I can share.
I'll send that. Yeah,
Yeah,
I'll send links to the book and everything. And yeah, no
yeah,
worries.
yeah. And thank you for coming here on Data Skill Story Show and sharing all about SQL. And I always learn something or the other from every show that we have a guest. So yeah, thank you so much.
All good.
Thank,
I've had a good time. It's good to be here.
Yeah, yeah.
thank you, Shashin, for being on the show. It's
Thanks,
nice
guys. Appreciate
chatting
it.
with you.
Thank you all for joining in. We will see you in our next episode.
See you guys.